Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am delighted to bring to you today Col Rod Honeycutt, who is running as a candidate. He's running for a seat on NC11, and today we are going to talk about the things that are in the hearts and minds of the people all over the world, not just in Western North Carolina, especially since the address that came from Ukraine today. Col Rod Honeycutt. Rod, how are you today?
Good, John. Thank you for having us. Excited to be here. Excited to talk to everyone in Western North Carolina and anyone who has the opportunity to watch the feed. You're going to hear what we're doing here in Western North Carolina, but we're going to spend about 10 minutes here talking about what we watched today with President Zelensky as he addressed our Congress. A very emotional address, but I don't want to distract from what's on everyone's mind when it comes to closing our southern border, to the cost of gas at the pumps, and just day-to-day life in America. But I think it's important, as today was a defining moment in our U.S. foreign policy, and I think it's important and critical to have that discussion to find out where Rod Honeycutt's at and where I think we should go with our foreign policy.
Now, Rod, let me just jump in because you've had a lot of experience. Obviously, you've served in Afghanistan, you've served in a lot of theatres all over the world, but in particular, you understand this situation with Putin very well because you were on the border at Ukraine. I mean, you visited that side of things, and what was, from what you see now, what are you taking from it? What is in your mind? Is this something that you saw happening?
So, from 2015 through 2018, I had the opportunity to travel up and down the Russia border, and from Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania up in the north, down to Ukraine. And there's always been a fear that President Putin would start his campaign to rebuild the Soviet Union. During my tenure, it was especially dominant up in the northern NATO countries. But as he annexed Crimea in 2014, we put in place, as part of our U.S. foreign policy, a set of deterrent measures. And those measures included establishing pre-positioned platform sites. And these were sites where you put equipment at, Bradleys, Abrams tanks, field artillery equipment, medical platforms, command and control platforms that would be used in a case like this, a break glass scenario, to aid Ukraine. And as we watched this build up, we had indication and warnings for about 8 months. And to me, it got real with the establishment of a hospital in Belarus. That was the defining moment that I said, okay, Putin's coming across. But we watched it for 8 months, and that equipment is right where we left it, and it should have been moved into Ukraine because there's actually railroads that move from those 4 sites that we established in Europe all the way to the Ukrainian-Russian border. And it did not take putting boots on the ground to get that equipment there. We could have loaded up on train cars, we could have pitched, and they could have caught it on the other end, and we could have stopped or at least minimized the impact of what we're seeing have an effect on 43 million men and women as their way of life is going to be changed.
Do you think, Rod, it's too little too late? I mean, you mentioned there that, you saw that it was building up. It was 8 months that it took. We had the equipment there. Is this too little too late? Is this a case of, bolting the horse's door when it's gone?
I believe so. I believe that we need to do everything we can to help Ukrainian men and women in their military, just like President Zelensky asked today. And, the President Biden today signed, I believe, with $800 million in aid. That is merely a drop in the bucket of what they will need, not only to defend, but to rebuild their country. So I think that we will see Russia complete their annexation of the entire country of Ukraine. Now it becomes important to contain the war and make sure that it does not spill over into the rest of Europe. And the next phase of this, or the ongoing, almost as critical part of this, is the humanitarian effort. As we got 1.2 million refugees that have trickled across the border. And that's where our great men and women from our U.S. forces are at. They're helping with humanitarian crisis. And that's going to take another international effort. But I do think it's too little too late. We should have been proactive back in November, December timeframe, and now we're into March. But we've been predicting all along that the terrain that the Russia army is navigating in right now, it's hard to turn spring, and they are going to get bogged down into the marshes and have to stick to hardball surfaces, and that's going to make it much more difficult. It's going to help the resistance as they start looking at taking out armored platforms, but it's going to be hard. And President Zelensky and the men and women of Ukraine deserve our prayers. They deserve a commitment from the United States. Now, some people are going to say that we've been helping all along, and we have been, but not to the point of saturation of military equipment that was necessary to get there in order to prevent that. Those 4 sites that we talked about had that equipment that was necessary. The javelins and the stingers that are now are critical, but they just got there so late. And, as you watched that video today, very emotional video, and there was a little bit of psyops and campaign IO in there because he wanted to get after the hearts and minds, and I think he did a very great job. It was a very well-produced video. I know that there was tears in the eyes of the audience eyes around as we watched, but you've got to take that as his intended method was to get those tears to make sure that the United States and other countries come to his aid. So I think he achieved that, and I think we've got to now have a measured but formidable package provided. But I think it's too late.
Here's the other thing, Rod, that, we've talked about this, we've intimated about this, but now we have, obviously, the whole world is against them, bar a few other countries that we always expected to be, but one in particular is China. And whilst they showed some kind of solidarity in the beginning, do you think the chain is beginning? Is a chink in the chain and chink in the armor there?
I think the international community's pushback and criticism on Putin has weighed in. We've seen a powerful picture there with President Xi, Prime Minister Xi, and President Putin at the Olympics. And I think that showed a little bit of unity. But I believe that President Putin has miscalculated. He didn't have the will of his people, the will of his military, nor the will of his government to undertake this. So you're seeing demonstrations in the street. And I think that the rest of the international community has condemned his actions. I think the sanctions were a little bit too weak in the beginning. Once we got the SWIFT sanctions in place, I think it stepped it up. But Putin's the type of thinker, deep thinker, and he will take a gamble. And I think it's going to take more of he's not going to stop by repetition of us telling him to stop and putting sanctions in place. It's going to take a blunt force trauma type of event to stop him, to realize that he's not going to achieve that objective of rebuilding the former Soviet Union. He has telegraphed that that's what he wants to do. And I think he will try. His next step will be Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania up in the north. There's a very small land bridge there. If he cut that off, he would cut those 3 countries off from NATO. But I think that's in his grand scheme, grand strategy to achieve that end state.
Let me ask you, Rod, because he's we know he's been saying this for years. It's been written in books. His whole playbook is out there. He has got his eyes on the prize, if you like, in other countries. But how do you take it when he turns around to a country like even Iceland and saying, you're not allowed to join NATO?
I think that's part of Putin's former KGB mindset. He will disregard the sovereignty of any country to achieve that. There's 29 countries in NATO. Ukraine could have potentially been the 30th. And then you've got Finland to be 31. And he is apprehensive about having NATO on his doorstep. But he's had NATO on his doorstep since the wall came down. Yeah. So this is nothing new. It's about fear, honor, and interest. There are 3 reasons you go to war. He was not fearful of Ukraine. He no longer had an interest after he had annexed Crimea in 2014. It was all about honor and taking Kyiv back. And Kyiv is where the former Soviet Union was born before it moved to Moscow. And that is part of his lineage and honor and history that he wants back. And I think he will stop at nothing to rebuild the old Russian bear.
You think Rod, that there's a weakness, before we jump on, our people in Western North Carolina and how it affects them, but I want to kind of jump on very quickly to the internal turmoil that's going on inside his own country. You talk about blunt force trauma. Is this perhaps an example of what we can see, it not coming blunt force from external sources, but internal forces?
And I've seen and read unconfirmed reports. I haven't no firsthand knowledge of it, that there's been bounties put on his head, and there are demonstrations in the street. And if you don't have the will of the government, the will of the people, and the will of your military, you're not going to achieve a strategic objective. And he had neither of those three, and I think that is what has caused him momentum. And I think that his momentum has been stymied by the resistance in Ukraine. And I think that's what has allowed the world to take a deeper look. Because if it had went fast, I believe that there would not have been as much resistance, much of a coalition. But this took a little while, and we're seeing the impacts of a poor logistics network on behalf of the Russian military. We're seeing the impacts of nature, as we're starting to see spring come on board, and he will be defined to use lines of communications along the hardball roads, which will make a much easier target for the resistance. So I think there are internal, and I think he's got a lot of factors going against him. But unfortunately, I think that it was too little, too late.
Yeah, and it's not for us to surmise. We can pray for things, but I want to kind of jump on now to, what's happening in Ukraine is absolutely abominable. And I know that recently you have spoken with Ukrainians, because in Western North Carolina we have Ukrainian businessmen, we have Ukrainian families here. But this war, it's affecting everybody all over the world, and in particular, it's affecting a lot of our folks at home. What message have you got for the folks here, Rod?
So we could have prevented it, and a less than proactive means of getting after this will cause economic stress on our economy. One, we're going to see, and we're predicting $5.50 at the gas pump on April 1st. We'll see. I hope there is an April Fool's type joke and we don't get to that. But you're also going to see the price of our bakery goods increase, as Ukraine was the number 2 importer or exporter of wheat products. And we'll also see the cost of some of our medicines increase, because there's some precious minerals that comes out of Ukraine specifically that we will have to overcome. So, there's going to be a little bit of instability in our market system, but we did have a great opportunity to meet with the Ukrainian community here, said prayers with them, and they are asking for donations of everything from rain boots to clothes to blankets. But what caught me by surprise a little bit was they're asking for helmets and flak vests to protect themselves, just to move around their streets. And our inactiveness have led to that. And that's a shame that we've put the men and women in Ukraine in that position.
It's absolutely terrible, and it breaks my heart to watch them and to watch the conflict unfold. Rod, I want to thank you for coming in. We did this very quickly, ladies and gentlemen, because it needed to be said, and we took the opportunity. But to let you know that there will be a lot more of these video podcasts where we'll be talking to the hearts of the people, we'll be talking to our local community, and you will also get the chance to address Rod. So final thoughts for people that are listening or watching in, Rod, on the situation today and the conversation that Zelensky had, or the speech.
So today, first of all, thoughts and prayers out to President Zelensky. He will go down as a national hero, as a world hero of what we've seen him do. But we can't take our eyes off of China. We can't take our eyes off the southern border. We can't take our eyes off of crime in our streets, the price of gas at the pumps. But it's critically important that your next congressman has the ability and the experience to draw back on world affairs and make decisions on our national treasures based off of that experience. Because there's a lot of candidates and a lot of political pundits around the world saying we should not get involved, we should not put boots on the ground. The truth's in the middle somewhere. And I want to make sure that as I represent Western North Carolina, I can also be looked upon to lead Western North Carolina through a crisis, through a world crisis like we're going through right now, and look in the eye and tell you from the heart and tell you from experience, this is what ground truth is, and this is what you need to take away, and this is what we need to do as a nation. And you know that I'm coming from experience and coming from 40 years of traveling around the world and have Western North Carolina values, Western North Carolina roots, and a solid Western North Carolina conservative foundation.
Rod, thank you so much. How can people get a hold of you? How can they donate to the campaign if they want to do that? Give them your details.
All right, you can call us anytime, 828-275-6848. I'm the one that answers the phone. I'm the one that will call you back immediately if I'm on the other line. You can also visit us at cutforcongress.com, CUTTFOR Congress.com, or visit our Facebook page, Rod Honeycutt for Congress. And we're on Twitter at Rod Honeycutt. Multiple platforms. Reach out, ask us a question, and we'll tell you what's on our mind. May not agree all the time, but we're going to be honest with you. God bless you, God bless yours, and God bless the United States of America.
Amen.
Amen, brother. Thank you.
That went well.